The moment no one challenged, everyone saw it. Everyone felt the hesitation, the subtle discomfort that passes through a room when something doesn't quite add up. And yet, no one spoke. The moment moved on, untouched, and with it, the chance to change what came next. This is how power shifts in modern empires, not through bad ideas, but through unchallenged ones. When intelligence is present, but courage is absent. When silence is mistaken for agreement. This story matters because the most dangerous decisions are often the ones no one questions. The billionaire at the center of this moment was respected for decisiveness. Meetings were efficient. Outcomes were clear. People trusted their judgment, sometimes too much. Over time, challenging the billionaire's perspective began to feel unnecessary, even impolite. The reveal began during a high-level strategy session. A proposal was presented with confidence. The logic was clean, the upside attractive, the risks framed as manageable. The billionaire listened, nodded, and signaled approval early. That signal carried weight. Conversation slowed. Questions softened. The room adjusted. No one wanted to be the person who slowed progress. A few executives noticed gaps, assumptions that deserved testing, scenarios that felt underexplored. But the momentum of agreement was already forming. The billionaire's approval had shifted the room from evaluation to execution. The moment passed. At first, the decision delivered exactly what it promised. Progress was fast, alignment strong, teams moved without friction. The absence of debate was praised as efficiency. The organization looked unified, confident, decisive. But something subtle had been lost. The challenge that sharpens thinking. The resistance that exposes weakness. The friction that prevents blind spots from becoming blind faith. The reveal deepened when early signals appeared that didn't fit the original narrative. Small discrepancies, minor deviations, nothing alarming, just enough to suggest a decision deserved a second look. No one raised it. Why would they? The decision was already moving. Revisiting it felt like doubt. Doubt felt like disloyalty. And disloyalty had no place in a culture built on trust. The billionaire remained unaware, not because information was hidden, but because challenge had quietly disappeared. Authority had become gravity. Ideas fell toward it instead of pushing against it. The moment no one challenged had already done its work, because once a room learns not to question, it stops seeing clearly, and the cost of that clarity would surface later, not as surprise, but as inevitability. The silence echoed long after the meeting ended. Execution moved forward smoothly, almost too smoothly. Teams interpreted the lack of challenge as confirmation that the path was correct. Timelines tightened. Resources flowed. The decision gained momentum simply because nothing stood in its way. The reveal continued as small anomalies appeared. Metrics lagged in places they shouldn't. Assumptions began to strain under real-world conditions. People noticed, but privately. Concerns were shared in side conversations, never in rooms where direction could still be adjusted. Silence had learned where it belonged. The conflict sharpened when a mid-level leader attempted to raise a question during an update. It wasn't confrontational, just a request for clarification. The room shifted instantly. Eyes moved. The billionaire listened, then responded confidently, reframing the issue as already accounted for. The meeting moved on. The signal was received. Challenge was not forbidden. It was discouraged. After that, questions became statements. Statements became footnotes. Footnotes disappeared. The organization learned how to adapt concerns into language that didn't interrupt momentum. Risk was softened. Doubt was delayed. Everything stayed on track, at least on paper. The emotional weight settled quietly across the company. People stopped feeling responsible for outcomes they hadn't shaped. If the decision failed, it wouldn't be because they stayed silent. It would be because the decision was wrong. And wrong decisions belong to leaders, not rooms full of observers. The billionaire felt the change without fully naming it. Meetings felt calmer. Progress felt faster. But something was missing. The sharp exchanges. The uncomfortable pauses. The moments when disagreement forced better thinking. Authority had become insulation. The reveal sharpened further when external pressure increased. New information arrived that contradicted early assumptions. It wasn't definitive, but it mattered. Teams adjusted execution quietly, compensating at the edges instead of revisiting the core choice. No one wanted to reopen the moment that had already passed. The silence that followed the original approval had done more than speed things up. It had frozen the decision in place. And frozen decisions don't bend, they break. The conflict was now locked in motion. The organization was moving quickly toward an outcome shaped less by intelligence than by the absence of resistance. The moment no one challenged was no longer behind them. It was carrying them forward, straight toward consequences no one felt authorized to stop. The conflict erupted when reality finally pushed back hard enough to be felt. What began as minor deviations became systemic strain. Costs climbed, timelines slipped, customer response softened in ways that could no longer be explained away. The decision that once looked clean now revealed its weak points. Not catastrophic, but undeniable. And still, no one challenged it. Instead, the organization adapted around it. Teams worked longer hours. Processes were tweaked. Messaging was adjusted to maintain confidence. The goal became mitigation, not reconsideration. Silence had evolved into maintenance. The emotional peak arrived during a closed review where the billionaire asked for reassurance. Leaders presented progress metrics, careful projections, and revised expectations. Everything was framed as manageable. The billionaire listened, then asked a single question that cut through the room. Text equals text dot replace 94. What would we do differently if we were deciding today? 94. No one answered. Not because there were no ideas, but because revisiting the decision felt forbidden. The weight of that silence was unmistakable. The room was full of capable people who saw the cracks, yet no one felt authorized to name them. The original moment had passed, and with it, the perceived right to intervene. The billionaire felt a jolt of clarity. Authority had unintentionally created fragility. By signaling approval too early, they had removed a window for challenge. What should have been a living decision had become untouchable. Privately, conversations finally surfaced. Leaders admitted concerns they had held for months, assumptions they wished they had tested, questions they chose not to ask because the moment didn't feel safe. Each confession traced back to the same origin, the silence after approval. The billionaire understood the full cost now. The decision itself might still be salvageable, but the culture that allowed it to go unchallenged was the real risk. A system that cannot question authority early will fail authority later. The conflict was no longer about one strategy. It was about whether challenge could exist at all. Because when a room loses the ability to push back, leadership becomes lonely, blind, and dangerous. Even when intentions are good, the next move would determine whether the billionaire corrected the outcome or corrected the environment that made the outcome inevitable. And only one of those choices would truly matter. The climax arrived when the billionaire chose to reopen the moment everyone had quietly sealed shut. In a decisive leadership session, they did something that immediately shifted the atmosphere. They questioned their own approval. Not defensively, not rhetorically, directly. They acknowledged that their early signal had closed the room too quickly. That confidence had replaced examination. That authority, used without intention, had discouraged the very resistance that protects good decisions from becoming bad ones. Then they did something rarer than reversal. They invited challenge retroactively. The decision was put back on the table. Assumptions were stripped down. Scenarios re-examined. Leaders were asked not what supported the plan, but what threatened it. At first, the room hesitated. Old habits do not dissolve easily. Silence had taught people to be careful. So the billionaire waited. And when the first objection finally surfaced, they didn't deflect it. They followed it. Momentum shifted immediately. Others spoke. Gaps were exposed. Flaws that had been worked around were named directly. Some elements of the strategy survived scrutiny. Others did not. The decision changed, not because it was weak, but because it was finally tested. The resolution unfolded through relief rather than tension. Teams felt reactivated. Responsibility returned. The room rediscovered something it had lost. The permission to protect the future by being uncomfortable in the present. The outcome improved. But more importantly, the environment changed. Approval was no longer a finish line. It became an invitation to think harder. The billionaire absorbed the lesson fully. Leadership is not about being unquestioned. It is about making questioning possible. The most dangerous moments are not when leaders are wrong. They are when no one feels allowed to say so. The empire moved forward wiser, not because the decision was corrected, but because the silence that protected it was broken. Challenge returned where it belonged. Early, visible, safe, and that changed everything. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future. The moment